I'm happy to stick with sati as mindfulness. Although you can use remembering or recollecting as you so desire. We're not getting pedantic about the word. If you look in the Nanadhaja 5:14 and in the Majjhima Nikaya 53, it actually says he remembers and calls to mind what was said and done a long time ago. So we can see that sati does actually have a lot to do with remembering. So we want to use the word remembering, that's fine. We'll see later that the Buddha says that you have to remember to put your mind on 4 objects: body, feelings, mind, and Dhamma. Now we'll often hear the last one also translated as mind objects, which is also fine. Again, so we're not getting pedantic. The whole idea of this morning's talk is not to have massive reworkings of the Pali language. We're not doing a Pali course here this morning. So I'm not going to try and translate everything, and I'm not going to try and confuse people. I will, generally speaking, stick to how we know them to be translated. So it's important to note here that these 4 objects, body, feeling, mind, and Dhamma, these are the only 4 objects of remembering or of being mindful or recollecting. So we need to be constantly guarding the sense doors. Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and of course our thoughts are also something we need to guard against. I was saying yesterday, that doesn't mean we poke our eyes out, that's cheating. And stick pencils in our hair rolls to rupture the eardrums, that's not what it's all about. It's all about guarding the sense doors, not destroying them completely. I've actually heard a story of a monk who mutilated himself to take away sexual desires, and that's not quite what the Buddha had in mind when he was talking about guarding the sense doors. We don't do that, and it's going a little bit too far. Now, the other thing that we need to remember about this sati is it is a specific type of mindfulness. You see, there's general mindfulness and there's specific mindfulness. And when we're discussing Satipatthana, we're talking about a specific object of mindfulness, which you can't use all of the time. I guess many of you drove here today. You need to use general mindfulness when you drive your car. When you're looking ahead of you, you're using your peripheral vision to see where the cars are going to try and cut in front of you. Maybe there are children on the footpath playing, so you're watching to make sure they don't run out into the middle of the road. You're watching the guy behind you who's getting too close. You're worried that he's going to come straight up the back of you with the wet road conditions. This is general mindfulness. And of course we need to have general mindfulness. It's very important, otherwise you're going to crash your car. You wouldn't have made it here if you hadn't been using a lot of general mindfulness. But when we're practicing the 4 Satipatthananas, we are using a specific mindfulness. And so you're guarding the sense doors and you're staying on a particular object. When we do use our sense doors, of course, which you have to do, As I say, we don't pluck our eyes out, we don't pierce our eardrums, but we still need to guard the sense doors. I mean, you need your eyes to see where you're going, you need your ears to hear what people are saying, all that sort of stuff. If you don't have taste buds, your food's just food. But we need to guard them. What we don't want to get happening is to be carried away with the things that we see, the sounds that we hear, and we start with liking, disliking, and stuff like that. So we can see sati as mindfulness, remembering or recollecting. So then we've got patthana. Patthana is the establishment or the setting up of mindfulness. And the commentaries offer two different derivations of Satipatthana. The first one is sati plus upatthana, which is the establishment of mindfulness. And the second one is sati plus patthana, which is the foundation of mindfulness. So the first one emphasizes the act of setting up, and the latter the objects to which the mindfulness is applied. The commentaries tend to go for towards the latter one, sati plus patthana, but it's probably the former one that's closest with sati plus upatthana. And this is supported by the Sanskrit smriti yupasthana. And we can also see some of the common expressions that are used in the sutras, like upatita sati, with mindfulness established, which is found in the Anguttara Nikaya 54:13, or parimukam satam upatthana, having established mindfulness in front of him, which is the Anguttara Nikaya 54:1. So if we read the first part of the Satipatthanasamyutta, it's taken from the Satipatthana Sutta, and it only gives a very, very brief description of what Satipatthana is all about. A lot of people say the Satipatthana Sutta is the most important sutta when it comes to Satipatthana, but it is actually quite a narrow description of Satipatthana. So there are many you'll find things in the Dhamma Nikaya, things in the Majjhima Nikaya, of course here in the Samyutta Nikaya, there's many things on Satipatthana. So the more of the sutras you get to read, the more information you start to get, you can start to piece things together. So as I say, we now understand that there's a difference between the sati used in the meditation practice and the sati that is used in everyday life. And they're completely different forms of sati, different forms of mindfulness. General mindfulness is actually sampajana as opposed to the other. So there are some forms of meditation that people call mindfulness meditation, but they're actually a more general type of mindfulness, because they tend not to fix specifically on one object of meditation. They will travel from here to here to here to go around and around, which is more of a general mindfulness. Not that there's anything wrong with this type of meditation. But a general mindfulness, when you see something, you switch your attention to the side. When the sound arises, you switch attention to the sound. You keep switching your attention. Whereas the sati we're discussing this morning is the establishment of the mind on one of the four particular objects: body, feelings, mind, and Dhamma. So I'm not going to read the entire sutta just in case you're wondering, because it's huge. I'm going to take some passages out of the Satipatthanasamyutta. So starting with the first one. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling in Vasali in Ambapali's grove. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus. Bhikkhus, Venerable Sir, the bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this. Bhikkhus, this is the one-way path for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the passing away of pain and displeasure, for the achievement of the method, for the realization of Nibbana. That is, the four establishments of mindfulness. What for? Now, it's interesting when we start to read this first chapter here. The Buddha says this is the one-way path. So some people will say this is the only path. Well, actually that can't be right, because it is the seventh factor of the eightfold path. So it can't be the only path. There are other factors to this path. But here it says it's the one-way path. And it leads, it's for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, passing away of pain and displeasure, for the achievement of the method, for the realization of Nibbana. So it only leads in one direction. Nibbana doesn't go backwards. But it is important, as I say, we need to put in the practice of the other bits of the path. You know, there are some teachers, some monks, will actually tell you that as long as you've got awake mindfulness and right concentration, that's enough. Well, I would rather listen to the teaching of the Buddha than the teaching of a monk who's not teaching what the Buddha said, because quite obviously when he says that, it's not correct. The Buddha says that we have to practice all the different parts of the path. If we're not practicing correctly, we might as well not bother practicing. I mean, if you don't have sila, you can't possibly even meditate. You know, there's lots of different types of mindfulness meditation out there in the world. The West has packaged it up quite nicely into the corporate packages they can sell for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. You know, there are many companies out there that teach their executives, teach their employees mindfulness in order to make more profit. So they teach their employees how they can get more money out of the poor people. Hardly the teachings of the Buddha. This is mindfulness in order to satisfy a person's greed. And that's not what the Buddha taught. The military today teaches their snipers mindfulness meditation so that they are more capable of killing the enemy. Very sure that's not what the Buddha had in mind when he was trying to teach mindfulness to people. Mindfully killing a person doesn't quite make a lot of sense. But you know, they teach the sniper how to breathe, so that your breathing is correct as you squeeze the trigger. Because if you don't breathe correctly when you're squeezing the trigger, then your rifle tends to jerk slightly and you miss your target. So they're teaching your soldiers how to kill more effectively through mindfulness meditation. And you know, this is hardly the Dhamma. So we have to reject these sorts of ideas. And a lot of people, they think they can go on a retreat. I've seen this many times. I've done it myself. People go on a retreat and they take the 8 precepts. You go on these retreats and they put you on 8 precepts. As if though the 8 precepts were some kind of magic beings, some magic words. You know, I've gone on to retreats myself where I've left the bar at 2 o'clock in the morning partying with my friends, and at 9 o'clock in the morning I've turned up at the retreat taken my 8 precepts, and then I'm expected to sit down and meditate for the next 10 days. And to be honest, my mind is not in that place. The fact that I've gone in and done my 8 precepts, they're just words that I've used. Yeah, okay, for the 10-day retreat, I'm not going to be drinking and stuff like that, It's not going to have a high luxurious bed if they just give me a mat on the floor. But my life isn't being lived according to the precepts. You're sitting there and it's a Friday, Friday night rolls around, and you're actually sitting there thinking of your mates down the pub having a good time, chasing after the ladies, because you're not living according to the precepts, so your mind can't get that settled. But for some reason, they seem to think that you can do this and think that you're going to achieve something. There are even meditation teachers, and much as I regret to say this, including monks, who tell you that you don't need the Dhamma to meditate. Well, there can be a certain amount of truth in that. You don't need the Dhamma to meditate, but you certainly need it to attain Nirvana. Because we can meditate and get a tranquil mind to a degree, but if we don't have the Dhamma, then there is no way that we can actually progress along the path to the point of Nirvana. It's not possible. And we know that this is true because even the Buddha himself, while he was still an unenlightened bodhisattva, was a very good meditator. His teachers were very good meditators. And yet the Buddha knew that something was missing. There was, no matter how good his meditation was, he realized that something wasn't there. He was missing out on something. And it wasn't until the Buddha rediscovers the Dhamma through his meditation practice that he becomes enlightened. He becomes the Buddha. So we can see that we actually need the Dhamma to attain enlightenment. It's just not possible to achieve it without it. So we know we have to have the right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And this is why it's called the one-way path, because it only leads one way, it leads to Dhamma. So continuing on, it says, here bhikkhus, a bhikkhu dwells contemplating the body in the body. Now a lot of early translations said the body as the body, but most translators today are quite happy that contemplating the body in the body is a closer translation to the Pali than contemplating body as body. So a bhikkhu dwells contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed covetousness and displeasure in regards to the world. He dwells contemplating feelings and feelings, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed covetousness and displeasure in regard to the world. And same with the mind, and same with the Dhammas. Now, we see here there's a repetitive phrase, contemplating the body in the body. Why is it repeated so often? Because the Buddha is trying to say that this is the object of determination. This is what we need to be contemplating, is the body in the body. So we're in actual fact isolating it from all the other things, because it's the only thing, it's the only object of meditation that we're currently contemplating. So we're not contemplating feelings, we're not contemplating mind, and we're not contemplating Dhamma. So at this stage we're contemplating the body in the body. And we can see we're only contemplating it in the body, so we're not contemplating the body as something permanent. something pleasurable, something beautiful and handsome. And the same with the other objects of meditation. We're not attaching anything to these objects of meditation. You're purely seeing them for what they are. So we can see, he talks about we have to be ardent. Ardency, it's an energy, it's a form of energy. We're putting all of our energy into this meditation. All of our energy is going on this one object of meditation. Clearly comprehending, this is wisdom. It's done to understand. It says, he dwells contemplating Dhamma and Dhamma, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed covetousness and displeasure in regard to the world. So these are the two hindrances that we're removing. Covetousness and displeasure. And so when we can see that we've started to remove these two things, then we know that we're actually getting somewhere in our meditation practice. We're having a degree of success. We're not there yet, but we're definitely on the way. So then we've got the fourth and the fifth spiritual factors, which are indriya. They're not indicated here. And while faith is not mentioned here, we're going to assume that it's a prerequisite for even taking up the practice. So we must have some sort of faith or confidence, if you prefer. I tend not to use the word faith too much because of connotations with Christianity and a blind faith. So if I'm talking to a bunch of Westerners, they don't like the word faith. So I have a tendency to swap it with the word confidence, and makes them feel a bit more comfortable because they don't like faith-based religions. So the second part of this sutta goes, on one occasion a blessed one was dwelling in Vesali, in Ambapali's grove. There the blessed one addressed the bhikkhus thus, Bhikkhus, Venerable Sir, the bhikkhus replied. The blessed one said this, Bhikkhus, a bhikkhu should dwell mindful and clearly comprehending. This is our instruction to you. So we can see ardent, he's mindful, he's clearly comprehending, he's clearly seeing, which a lot of people will translate as vipassana, clearly seeing, and with vipassana can be translated as to see clearly. So through the practice, the comprehension starts to arise within us. We start to see. But we see that there's a difference between the sati and the sampajanya. The sampajanya is the more general mindfulness. The sati is the one that we're holding on to. Now, sampajanya is important, but it's actually not one of the factors of enlightenment. But it is important because, as I say, without sampajanya, we'd have all sorts of problems. Walk into the shop, we'd bump into lampposts. Occasionally here in Malaysia, the footpaths aren't quite even. Might trip over something. Might stand on something a bit smelly. So yeah, we have to watch what we're doing. We need general mindfulness, but we have to be sure that we have this sati. In meditation, we don't need general mindfulness. In meditation, you put the general mindfulness to one side, whether you're meditating for 10 minutes, 1 hour. We make this time, we can put all these other things to one side and and just spend the time contemplating this one object that we've decided we're going to concentrate on. It says, and now bhikkhus is a bhikkhu mindful. Here bhikkhus is a bhikkhu dwells contemplating the body and the body ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed covetousness and displeasure and regards. So it's fairly much like the first part of it. And how bhikkhus does a bhikkhu exercise clear comprehension? Here bhikkhus, a bhikkhu is one who acts with clear comprehension in going forward and returning, when looking ahead and looking aside, when drawing in and extending the limbs, when wearing his robes and carrying his outer robe and bowl, when eating, drinking, chewing his food and tasting. So this is the Sampajana, this is the general mindfulness. But it's good to have this general mindfulness because we can't always be sat meditating. It's not possible, especially lay people. Can probably spend less time sitting meditating than monks can, because your boss will probably get a bit angry. He's not going to pay you for sitting at your desk for 8 hours cross-legged contemplating your navel. You may find that you've got time for more meditation after he sacks you from your job. But then that's not going to help pay the bills, so it's probably not a good idea to try and be quite so mindful when you're at work. But, when for instance, it's a bit difficult now because I'm talking at the same time, but, when I go to get this glass of water, I can be aware of extending my arm, and I can be aware of all the movements of grasping the glass. I can feel the temperature of the glass. I drink the water, I can feel the water go down my throat. So, but this is general mindfulness, because I'm skipping from one thing to another to another. When we do our walking meditation, you quite often find me out here in front of the Asaka Hall. So I start off in one direction, and so for me, I know going forward. When I turn to come back, I know coming back. When I turn to going forward, turn is coming back. I'm assuming that the Buddha's instructions here are because the monks would have had a walking path near their kuti or wherever it was they were staying at the time. So they'd go forward on the path and they'd turn and they'd come back on the path and they'd go forward and come back. And so a monk knows going forward, I go forward, a monk knows coming back, I come back. And then you've got bending, stretching, all these sorts of things. So this is general mindfulness because the monk's doing more than one thing. If you bend down to pick up a stone to clear the path or whatever it is. So there's more than one object of mindfulness, although there's still one object at a time. You're not staying, you're not trying to stay for a great length of time. So this is general mindfulness. But it's still important, when we eat mindfully. And if you're living in the forest, even if there's, for my temple in Thailand, there was 4 of us. And we ate in silence. And we sat down, we sat together. It's a time for the monks to come together at meal time. So we'd come together and we would have our food in our bowl and we would silently and quite slowly eat our meal. And it was done in silence so that we could be contemplating. So it's like, again in Thailand we use the spoon, here we use our fingers. But we're aware of the movement of the hand going into the bowl and lifting the food up and bringing it to our mouth and chewing the food. And actually it took some time to eat your meal. Sometimes you'd be contemplating the people who gave you the food. And then there's the texture of the food. Chewing of the food, the swallowing of the food, all these sorts of things. Taste of the food, Some of the foods were hot, some of the foods were, especially because we used to chuck everything in our bowl. So we'd have curry and cake. Different textures, different tastes. and really contemplating all of these things. But this is Satipatthana, this is general mindfulness. But it helps for us to remain mindful. Our sense doors aren't running away everything and getting attached. We're just aware of movements, we're aware of taste, we're aware of touch, we're aware of these things. So it is important, but as I say, it's not one of the factors of enlightenment. Sati is a factor of enlightenment. It's quite important to understand that. But as I say, we're not chucking Satipatthana out into the garbage. Definitely serves a purpose. See, when you're at work, sometimes we go to work. I know I used to occasionally. I'll go to work. I get to work on Monday morning, I'll be thinking about Friday night. Doesn't make for a very good work day, I hate this. Oh, it's a Friday yet. Oh no, it's 10 past 8, I've been here for 10 minutes. So, coffee at 10 o'clock. I start thinking about all these other things, the boss comes in, what are you doing? Nothing. Quite right, you're doing nothing. You're not spending all the time thinking about what I did last weekend, what I'm going to do this weekend, and what's for dinner tonight. Did I turn the lights off before I left the house? All these things go through your head, But we can, at work, we can just be focused on what it is that we're doing. A lot of us today work on computers. So all you have to do is, whatever work you have in front of you, we do that task, then we move on to the next task. So we're still using mindfulness throughout the workday, but we can't, sometimes some meditation practices, they slow everything down. So when you're walking, you see people doing a really slow movement of the foot during walking meditation. You can't do that when you're working on a computer keyboard. Because when you do that, slow, you're not going to get much typed up, are you? The boss asks you to type a letter, he comes back half an hour later. And in actual fact, all you're going to have is a whole page filled with one letter. Because it just goes across the page, doesn't it? So we can't mindfully press our computer key as such, because we're not going to get very far. But we can just be aware of doing this job. So our mind's not on the coffee machine at the moment, it's just contemplating this job. The coffee machine comes a coffee machine time. So we do need to have general mindfulness, and we can practice general mindfulness. But we can't practice sati as such, unless your job's a meditation teacher, in which case you can. Because you can practice sati all the time. So going on to the next one. The third part of the sutta. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling in Savatthi in Jeta's Grove and at Pandika's Park. Then a certain bhikkhu approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said, Venerable Sir, it would be good if the Blessed One would teach me the Dhamma in brief, so that having heard the Dhamma from the Blessed One, I might dwell alone, withdrawn, diligent, ardent and resolute. It is in just such a way that some foolish persons here make requests of me, but when the Dhamma has been spoken to them, they think only of following me around. And the Buddha's had these requests before, and obviously some of the monks just don't pay a lot of attention. Some people, I think they thought if they were close to the Buddha, they'd attain enlightenment. Maybe he would say something would click inside, and they'd become arahants and follow around. Maybe if they touched his robes, maybe some of his magic would wear off on him or something like this. The one goes on, let the Blessed One teach me the Dhamma in brief. Let the Fortunate One teach me the Dhamma in brief. Perhaps I may understand the meaning of the Blessed One's statement. Perhaps I may become an heir of the Blessed One's statement. It says, well then, bhikkhu, purify the very starting points of wholesome states. Now that's important. purify the very starting point of wholesome states. So, first of all, we have to have the view that we're responsible for our own actions. I was talking to somebody this morning, we were discussing anger, and he said, yes, but if somebody does something to you, then it's okay to respond in this way. And so I asked him, could he show me a sutta where the Buddha actually stated this fact? You know, I used to do it. I used to say, oh, that person made me so angry I had to hit him. No, I allowed anger to take over. The person might have said something to me or done something to me, looked at my girlfriend and upset me. And so I got angry and I used my fists on that person. It wasn't my fault. It's like the guy's laying in a hospital bed. How is that not my fault? Did he beat himself up? Did you beat him up? But we're so quick to blame others. It's never my fault. It's always somebody else's fault. Well, if he hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have done that. We're not taking responsibility for our own lives here. When anger arises, we should just be aware that anger has arisen. The trouble is we have a tendency that we take ownership of the emotion. Anger arises, so it becomes my anger. And of course, as soon as we take ownership of things, we want to hold on to it, we want to cling to it. We don't know where it goes. It's my anger. I mean, you wouldn't go to the shop and buy a box of anger, would you? It's like, we don't wake up in the morning and go, I must pop into the supermarket and see if they've got any anger on the shelves this morning. They might have two for the price of one. No, we don't go out looking for anger. So why, when anger arises, do we want to take ownership of anger? So we have to learn how to let anger go. Somebody offends us, somebody must be having a bad day. Somebody looks at your girlfriend, of course he's looking at her. She's hot. You don't go getting upset. Should be proud that another man's looking at your woman or another woman's looking at your man. Don't get upset. It just shows that you've got good taste. But we don't. We get angry, we get jealous, and so often we either react verbally or we react physically. And that's our karma. The person who made us angry doesn't reap the karma of our anger. We do. So this is something we've got to be very, very aware of. Oh yes, but I don't know if you've heard of righteous anger. And what is that? Righteous anger doesn't exist. Good excuse doesn't exist. It doesn't work. Try that in a court of law. You've been charged with assault. That was righteous assault. So he's not going to wear it. He's going to give you some righteous time to serve. It's not going to be the person you assaulted that's going to do the time. It's going to be you. So we have to be very, very careful with this. So we understand that there's karma, and karma has its fruits. You do good, and there's good karma or virtuous karma. Do bad, and there's bad karma or non-virtuous karma. And we are responsible ourselves for this karma we produce. So we've got to have right view. And remember I said earlier on that you can't meditate, or you can't attain nirvana without the Dhamma. So how do we get right view? We get right view by understanding the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths is Dhamma. So we understand the Dhamma, we understand the Four Noble Truths, we hear the Dhamma, but the only way you're really going to get right view is by meditating. Otherwise you get an intellectual understanding of right view, which is a start, but you don't have a practical understanding of right view. That comes from the meditation. It's kind of like learning to drive. You know, a person can say to you, well, there's an accelerator, there's a brake and there's a clutch, that's the steering wheel, there's your gear shift. And what you have to do is you have to put your foot on the clutch, put the car in first gear, disengage the handbrake, you know, and do your hands around it. I'll probably fail my driving test these days if I try to sit I'll forget half this stuff. They can explain all this to you, but it's not until you actually start driving the car that you actually understand how the clutch works, how the brake works. I mean, you know, you go to stop your car, you just, unless it's an automatic, if you just put your foot on the brake and not on the clutch, you're going to have a problem. So people can give you the theory, but even trying to learn how to use the clutch, you've got to do some practice. You know? That's why you never get people driving lessons in your own car, because you just go through the gearboxing. I'm trying to teach them that R does not stand race. It doesn't mean race, it means reverse. You know, you're going to hit the car behind you, people are into R for race. You know? So people need to learn this by the practice. And it's the same with the Dhamma. We hear the Dhamma, but then we need to start the practice of meditation. This is how we get the true understanding of the Dhamma. Otherwise it's just book knowledge. You know, you come and you listen to a Dhamma talk, you go, oh, that was really good, and then you go home and forget about it. You need to sit down and contemplate the Dhamma. You need to meditate on the Dhamma. And Jima Nikaya 43, right view, is its friend, how many conditions are there for the arising of right view? Friend, there are two conditions for the arising of right view. The voice of another and appropriate attention. These are the two conditions for the arising of right view. So the voice of another. Now some people say that means you have to listen to Dhamma talks, you can't just read the sutras. I'm not quite sure that's true. In actual fact, it's probably wrong, because it would have been right when the Buddha said it, because they didn't have the books. But in actual fact, this is the voice in writing, so I think you can actually read it for yourself. But sometimes hearing another person is actually very, very helpful, because sometimes they might say something slightly different from the way you've read it, and occasionally it can make sense. Sometimes it might sound like a load of rubbish, but there are times that it can make sense and something can click inside and go, ah, that's what it is. So it is good to hear other people talking about the Dhamma. And we need to pay appropriate attention, which is good to see nobody's got their iPads out, you know, playing Angry Birds. It's probably not appropriate attention. So it's by listening to the Dhamma and paying appropriate attention that we can actually start to meditate. Now we have something to meditate about, because a lot of people, you know, they say, I want to get a calm mind, I want to have tranquility. We can get this from other forms of meditation, but they're not lasting forms of meditation. They tend to last for the time that you're on your meditation cushion, and then there's people that get back up and they go back to living their old ways because they haven't understood the Dhamma, or they don't have the Dhamma, so they can't understand what they don't know. And so we have to listen to the Dhamma, pay appropriate attention to the Dhamma, and then start practicing the Dhamma according to the Dhamma. I would like to put that in practicing the Dhamma according to the Dhamma, because sometimes there's some Dharma out there being practiced that it's just not Dharma. Get some, you go on Google, there's some wacky Dharma out there. People are just, they use it's what I call cut and paste Buddhism. They take little bits of this, but then they might think that this Hindu practice is quite cool, so they'll chuck that in as well. And then they go, well, I quite like the way the Sufis do this, so they put that in there, and then you end up with this thing that absolutely doesn't resemble the Dhamma at all, but they assure you, the teachers assure you that it is the Dhamma, and it's not. So, without listening to the Dhamma, then we can't clearly understand the reason for the practice. And that's important. We need to understand why we practice. So the Buddha's saying here that right view and right conduct are the basis for a successful practice of mindfulness meditation. Like I said before, if we're not living according to the precepts, then you can't meditate. It's not going to happen. It's not possible. If you are breaking the precepts, and I know we sometimes we break the precepts accidentally, we're not perfect, and stuff happens. Sometimes we get angry, we get annoyed, shout at the kids, stuff like that. Flip the bird at the driver who just cut you up, and all this sort of stuff. We get a little angry. But when these things happen, we actually remember that we should be trying to live slightly different to that, so we regret what we did and we try to be a bit more virtuous the next time. And the person cuts you up in the traffic, well, maybe he's got somebody seriously ill in the car and he's trying to get them to the hospital. We naturally think he's just an ignorant git. But he actually may have a good reason for driving so erratically. You don't know. So these are things, and if we use these practices, then things like anger stop arising in us, or it starts to arise and we can cut it quite quickly. Before we do rude hand signs out the window and stuff like that, we're able to control ourselves a little bit better. So we have to remember that before the arising of the Buddha, there was lots of religious practices, there was lots of different types of meditation. But it was only after the Dhamma was rediscovered that Aryans arose. Now, when I'm talking about Aryans, a lot of people automatically think about Arahants. I'm also talking about Satipatthanasamyutta. There's a lot of people, they go, don't start talking about becoming an Arahant. Too difficult. And probably is quite difficult. But of course, becoming stream enterers is something that we can all aspire to. It's something that's not the domain of monks, not the domain of the bhikkhunis. It's the domain of any of us who are practicing the Dhamma according to the Dhamma. That's only the first step. There's lay people who can go much further than that. I was saying yesterday how impressed I am with the practice of a lot of lay people. They've got so much in their lives that they have to deal with. And yet, they turn up at the temple and you can see just how calm and how serene they are. They're practicing. These are practicing Buddhists. Even with their busy lifestyle, going to work, getting the kids to school, getting the kids to bed at night time. And yet they turn up and they've got that serene look on their face. And you just know they're practicing and they're practicing well. So much admiration for lay people. I couldn't do it if I was a lay person. I became a pope. That's why I became a monk. Honestly, I became a monk because I knew if I didn't become a monastic, I would not be able to progress on the path. There were too many things out there. My sense doors were open 24/7. There were times, honestly, there were times that no matter how tired I was, sometimes I wouldn't go to sleep just in case I missed something. I was always worried that something might happen while I was sleeping. Something exciting could take, and so I'll stay awake just in case it happened. And so it's true, that's why I became a monk, because I knew that I was not going to progress very far as a lay person. It was just, my sense desires just worked overtime. And that's why I say I'm amazed when I see just how well some lay people can practice. It just blows me out of the water, to be perfectly honest. It's absolutely fantastic. All strength here. But we uphold our sila by listening to the Dhamma. Because when we listen to the Dhamma, we understand what upholding the sila, how important our morality is. Because we start to understand that if we don't uphold our sila, then we attain non-virtuous karma. It's the Dhamma that tells us this. So we uphold our sila, we listen to the Dhamma, and we begin meditating. And the fourth little soothing. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling among the Kosalans at the brown verge of Sala. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus: Bhikkhus, those bhikkhus who are newly ordained, not long gone forth, recently come to the Dhamma and discipline, should be exhorted, settled, and established by you in the development of the four establishments of mindfulness. What for? Come, friends, dwell contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending, unified, with limpid mind, concentrated with one pointed mind, in order to know the body as it really is. Dwell contemplate feelings and feelings, mind and mind, Dhamma and Dhamma, in order to know the phenomenon as they really are. Bhikkhus, those bhikkhus who are trainees, who have not attained their mind's ideal, who dwell aspiring for the unsurpassed security from bondage, they too dwell contemplating the body and body, so on as earlier. Bhikkhus, those bhikkhus who are arahants, whose taints are destroyed, who have lived the holy life, done what had to be done, laid down the burden, reached their own goal, utterly destroyed the fetters of existence, are completely liberated through final knowledge. They too dwell contemplating body and body, mind and mind. Even the Buddha, the Samma Sambuddhasa, the fully enlightened one, spent his time contemplating body and body. It was the Buddha. He still found it helpful to spend his time in this way. Bhikkhus, those bhikkhus who are newly ordained, not long gone forth, recently come to this Dhamma and discipline, should be exhorted, settled and established by you with the development of these four establishments of mindfulness. So we can see here that the newly ordained, those just in training, because everybody is exhorted to practice the four Satipatthanasamyutta. This is the Buddha exhorting us to stay with it. I'm going to go to the sixth part of this one now. I like this one. Bhikkhus. Once in the past, a hawk suddenly swooped down and seized a quail. Then while the quail was being carried off by the hawk, he lamented, "We are so unlucky, of so little merit. We strayed out of our own resort into the domain of others. If we'd stayed in our own resort today, in our own ancestral domain, This hawk wouldn't have stood a chance against me in a fight. I'm plucky little quail, aren't I? But what is your own resort quail? What is your own ancestral domain? The freshly ploughed field covered with clods of soil. Then the hawk, confident of her own strength, not boasting of her own strength, released the quail, saying, "Go now, quail, but even me, you won't escape me." Then meagre as the quail went to a freshly ploughed field covered with clods of soil. Having climbed up on a large clod, he stood there and addressed the hawk. "Come and get me now, hawk. Come and get me." Oh, scruffy little quail. Then the hawk, confident of her own strength, not boasting of her own strength, folded up both her arms and suddenly swooped down on the quail. But when the quail knew that hawk has come close, he slipped inside that clod, and the hawk shattered her breast right on the spot. So does beakers when one strays outside one's own resort and into the domain of others. So, if we look at the hawk as either you people or, the monastics or whatever, when we stray outside of our own domain, this is when we start seeking for pleasures associated with the sense doors. When we start looking for pleasant sounds, pleasant sights, pleasant smells, pleasant tastes, pleasant touches. We're in a marvelous domain. And so easy for Mara to snare us. When I am, or even when people take a preception, we have this thing about no entertainment, no singing, no dancing, all this sort of thing. And singing and dancing are not evil things. I'm not going to go to hell just because you sing or you dance or whatever. But for a monk especially, a monk's domain is his meditation practice, his study of the Dhamma. And when a monk starts to stray outside, he could wind up disrobing, because he starts to get caught by the sense pleasures. He starts to enjoy these pleasant sights, these pleasant sounds. And he gets so caught up in it that he decides, well, that looks like more fun than getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and meditating and having to come downstairs and sweep the yard and then go and do some chanting. And he wants to start partying. So then he just disrobes and he goes back to the lay line. He's been snared by Maha. But had he have stayed in his own domain, and the same with the lay people who are meditating, when we stay in our own domain, it becomes very hard for Maha to snare us. Yes, sometimes we will see pleasant sights. Sometimes we will hear pleasant sounds. But when we're guarding the sense doors, we become very aware of what's happening. And then we're able to go back to our object of meditation. You've shut the sense door, Mara can't get at you. The hawk's going to shatter the breast on the problem turn. And so we have to be very, very careful. And so again, for lay people, it's not easy. You see many more things than I would see as a monk. I do see people cutting cars up because sometimes we do go out and cars in. But there's a lot of things. You go to the office, there's lots of gossip, which of course you don't listen to because you're all Buddhist. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens out there that us monks actually don't get to see quite so much of. But we can still guard ourselves. When we're sitting in the office and the gossip starts, we don't have to listen to the gossip. We can go back to something else. So we're now regarding the same stores. So we have to be very, very careful. And as I say, for lay people, it's a lot harder. That's why sometimes I'm completely blown away by just how what lay people do. I'd be useless. I really would. I'd get snared so fast. I'd be out there trying to outdo Maha. I don't have nothing on me now. Well, then you're good. Check this little Kiwi out. So I'm really, really quite impressed. And now we're going to go to the story of the cook. Bhikkhu, supposing a foolish, incompetent, unskillful cook would have presented king or royal minister with various kinds of curries, sour, bitter, pungent, sweet, sharp, mild, salty, bland. That foolish, incompetent, unskillful cook does not pick up the sign of his master's preference. Today this curry pleased my master, or he reached for this one, or he took a lot of this one, or he spoke in praise of this one, or the sour curry pleased my master today. And cook doesn't spot these things happening. He doesn't gain gifts of clothing, wages, bonuses. And why? Because he hasn't picked up the sign of what it is that pleases his master. And it's the same with the monks. The Buddha says they dwell contemplating the body and the body. But what he dwells contemplating the body and the body, his mind doesn't become concentrated. His corruptions are not abandoned. He doesn't pick up that sign. And it goes on to the competent cook, and the competent cook's the exact opposite. And he cooks all these foods, and then he becomes aware that this is pleasing to my master. My master really went for the meek or end to cook something like that. Seemed to like that quite a lot. Quite fancy relaxer, and seems to be rather partial to roti canai. So the cook makes a note of all of these things, and so he knows how to please his master, and the master will reward the cook. And so the good cook, it's like the monk who practices and understands that this is beneficial and this is not beneficial. And when he knows what is beneficial and what is not beneficial, then he can attain jhana. Because what you've got to do is define, you're not going to understand enough to be able to attain your Dhamma. It's going to be out of your reach. Once we understand what we need to abandon, then we will abandon it, we'll let it go. Once we've let it go, then we start to progress in our practice. If we don't understand that it needs to be abandoned, then we tend to hold on to it. And we see that happening quite a lot with people. They hold on to negative thoughts. They don't let them go. And they'll even say, if you don't remember your past, then you make the same mistake again. There's a difference between remembering your past and getting caught up in your past. See, I can remember my past because I have a thing called a memory. And unlike a computer, I can't just delete, empty the cache and cookies and start all over again. It doesn't work that way. So I have a past that I can remember. But the important thing is not to dwell on the past. Otherwise I start to think about, that person hurt me, that person harmed me. I did this to that person, I shouldn't have done that. it's okay to understand that I've done this in the past and it was a non-virtuous action. But that's it. I understand that this action is non-virtuous and I need to change the way that I do things. So it's okay to remember in that way, but we have a tendency to, oh yeah, I remember that day that guy did that to me. If I see him again, I'm going to give him more for it. I'm going to give him such a knock up the side of the head, you know. And we can spend hours, days. It's like a chess game. You know, we actually play these games, these battle strategies in our head, and then they tend to come to nothing except they just frustrate and anger us. We're just wandering off into Mara's domain, and we've stopped the practice of meditation. All the time we're thinking like this, we're not going to attain jhana, we're not going to attain nirvana, you know. So we have to let go of these things. But if a thought arises in your mind that, oh, I've got some spare time, I should go and meditate, well, there's nothing wrong with that kind of a thought. It's a good thought. And we can listen to that thought, go, yeah, there's an idea, you know. I'm sitting on the bus, I'm in a traffic jam, it's going to take about 45 minutes to get to work. I'll practice meditation. Good thought. This is right understanding. With right understanding, we start to abandon the hindrances. We start to adapt what is good. Our meditation improves. And then all of a sudden we start going up through the jhanas. And then you become an arahant. And you quit your job and become a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni. And so now we're going to have a look at, well, we're not going to have a look at the most beautiful girl in the land. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living among the Sangha's, where there was a town of the Sangha's named Sadaka. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus. Bhikkhus, Venerable Sir, the bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this. Bhikkhus, suppose that on hearing the most beautiful girl of the land, a great crowd of people will assemble. Now that most beautiful girl of the land will dance exquisitely and sing exquisitely. On hearing the most beautiful girl of the land is dancing, the most beautiful girl of the land is singing, an even larger crowd of people will assemble. Then a man would come along, wishing to live, not wishing to die. Wishing for happiness, averse to suffering. Someone would say to him, good man, you must carry around this bowl of oil filled to the brim between the crowd and the most beautiful girl of the land. A man with a drawn sword will be following right behind you, and wherever you spill even a little of it, right there he will chop your head off. What do you think, bhikkhus? Would that man stop attending to that bowl of oil and out of negligence turn his attention outwards? No, Venerable Sir. I've made up this simile, bhikkhus, in order to convey a meaning. This here is the meaning. The bowl of oil filled to the brim. This is a designation for mindfulness directed to the body. Therefore, bhikkhus, you should train yourselves thus. We will develop and cultivate mindfulness directed to the body. Make it our vehicle. Make it our basis. Stabilize it. Exercise ourselves in it and fully perfect it. This bhikkhus, you should train yourself. Now that's quite an amazing story. I mean, it really lets us know just how much attention we should be putting on the practice of the four Satipatthanas, whether it's body, feelings, mind, or Dhamma. And we think, how important is it, that to spill a drop. When we spill a drop, it means our attention has gone outside. It's gone out of the sense doors. We're looking outwards instead of looking inwards. And we realize that this looking outwards can cause us to go off the path. And so we're still stuck in the cycle of samsara. And we just know that Maha is out there waiting. Got it. As soon as you step outside your domain, and Maha is just waiting, ready to chop your head off. And it can be so easy. Somebody asked me one day, they said, it must be difficult being a monk in Asia. And I said, why is that? I figured they'd do it. I said, so many beautiful Asian women. I said, don't look at them. I said, well, how can you not look at them? I said, you see them? I said, but you don't look at them. I said, that must be hard. I said, nobody said the monk's life was supposed to be easy. And it's true, you can, monks, a woman come into the temple. A beautiful woman come into the temple. Well, you've got a choice. You're either aware that a woman has come into the temple and that's it, or now you're in Maha's domain. The minute that the head starts turning and you start following, you've now stepped outside of your own domain and you're back into the domain of Maha. And so a monk is aware. Now, okay, so you see a woman, you go, oh, she's beautiful. Okay, you're starting to step outside, but if you can catch it fast enough, you step back inside. And it's the same with sounds and smells and stuff like that. And you've got to be very careful that sometimes we can smell things and say, oh, that smells nice, and start wandering around, where's that coming from? And instead of just going, something's cooking, something smells pleasant, which is okay. Of course, we're allowed to say something smells pleasant, as long as we don't get attached to it. And that's the trick, is the non-attachment to what the sense doors are picking up. Because again, as I say, we don't poke our eyes out, we don't shove pencils through our eardrums or shove stuff up our nostrils so that we can't smell and all that sort of stuff. Those things are always going to be there, but it's how we deal with those things. And so we, as much as we can, we just keep our mind where our mind is supposed to be. When we keep our mind where it's supposed to be, then we actually start to progress along the path. That's about all I think we've got time for today. It's a huge teaching, so I've only done it very briefly. So are there any questions or any comments that you'd like to make? And if so, could you please use the microphone, Sister Bodhi goes to get the questions.
Bhante, you're the first one who mentioned a lot of Maha. Since the Maha is like the other religion, not the same, like similar, I'm not sure you really. Physics said your talking enjoyment, have fun, is towards the Maha other than to the Buddha. I'm just wondering, my question, I have been here for a while. It seems to say that every time I see the temple, they only say, be well and happy. That's it. I don't more than that. But I honestly feel that there should be more. Should be well, happy, successful, and rich. Yeah, you can go with Vihara if you have that. Okay. So my question is this: I have learned a lot about Buddhism due to my family as a Buddhist. We talk about meditation, learning kind of meditation, Vipassana meditation, but we never heard of. Maybe I don't know whether in the sutra they mention about meditation. That could help the Buddhist layman to be very independent, very successful, very financially free, and they have all the time to come to the temple and meditate to the Vihara. So what do you think of that?
Well, of course, the Buddha had nothing against wealth. The problem with wealth is, for some people, they get caught up in making money. And often it can lead to stinginess. They don't want to give their money away, it's my money. But there's actually nothing inherently wrong. I mean, I know some religions, the world money is the root of all evil. It's absolutely a load of rubbish. Money is not the root of all evil. But sometimes we get caught up in the making of money. and we spend too much time. My own family, for instance, my parents were very, very focused on making money. At one stage, my mother was the highest paid person in New Zealand, earning in excess of $150 per hour. Somebody asked her once why she didn't run for Prime Minister, and she said he doesn't get paid enough. But there were certain things that got lost as a result of that. I have very little memory of my mother hugging me. When I was in school plays, she didn't have time to come and to watch me perform in school plays and stuff like that. And in actual fact, she wasn't that happy with her money because she became obsessed with it. She came from a very poor family originally. She pulled herself up by the bootlaces and then kind of went over the top. So we have to be very, very careful when it comes to money. Sometimes money doesn't give us the happiness that we think it might, and sometimes we neglect our family, we neglect our friends, and we can become very, very bitter and very, very stingy. But, when, may you be well and may you be happy, well, one, your happiness doesn't depend upon money. It's like that money can't buy you this happiness. You can't go to the supermarket and buy a box of happiness. It's not sat there next to the box of anger that you don't particularly want. Happiness is something that you create yourself. And we need to understand, because there's worldly happiness, which we get from, we have a nice car, nice partner, our children do exactly as we ask them to do, exactly when we ask them to do it. They get A grades when they go to school, and there's, but that's not reality at the best of times. But that's a worldly happiness. But the happiness that they wish upon you when they say, may you be well, may you be happy, this is a happiness that has no cause. You see? A happiness that has a cause is impermanent. The cause goes away, the happiness goes away, therefore it is suffering. So what we are hoping for you to have is the happiness that doesn't have a cause. Because a happiness that doesn't have a cause can't be taken away. So this is the happiness that we are more interested in. And although we don't want to see you living underneath a bridge, sleeping on a piece of cardboard, but the happiness that we are wishing for is, in actual fact, for your spiritual happiness. Though sometimes if you come to the evening puja, and we've got the list of sponsors for the evening puja, there are some where we're wishing somebody success in their career. Well, success in your career obviously means financial success as well as other types of success in your career. So we're not averse to wishing people to have a bit of money, but you must remember that your happiness, your true happiness, doesn't have a cause. You're just happy because that's the bliss of Nibbana. And I would much rather you have the bliss of Nibbana than a few million ringgit in your bank account, because I know which one's more profitable in the end.
Just one very sutra. They have, the sutra, Nibbana, in Nanda, or destroyed by the Muslims. So a lot of things have been lost, I believe. So I don't know how much accumulate the sutra. Do they in the sutra, the teaching of harmonious wealth. I mean, why should you always be happy and poor? Why should you be happy? You could be happy, right?
Yeah.
You could be well.
Yeah.
You could be rich.
Yeah.
You have everything.
You
Why
could-
can't you have everything? Why have to be this or that?
No, it doesn't say it has to be this or
Is
that.
there in the sutra that they teach you could have everything, and yet when you leave this earth, you will go divine? Does such teaching the sutra?
Well, there could be, but I'd have to do a search on that one. But I mean, don't forget, there are kings. Now, those kings, they had kingdoms, they had untold amounts of wealth. And they also had the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha did not, see, some religions will tell you to give away your wealth, usually to the religion. I mean, Osho used to do it, didn't he? He used to tell his followers that you don't need money, give everything to him. So he apparently needed the money, but his followers didn't. Buddha never said this. There's nothing in Buddhism that says you must give your money away. Otherwise, I could get very clever. I could, run around looking for that chap who owns Air Asia. I could go and kind of persuade him that he should give his money away, and I was a very worthy charity. But that's not what Buddhism is about. Buddhism, we don't say money is going to cause you misery, which some religions will actually try and stress. It's a very good way of getting you to sell your house, sell your car, sell your wife and children, give everything to the particular religion. And Buddhism doesn't do that, but you have to understand that if you have this wealth, then you can lose this wealth. You can be swindled out of your wealth. You can make some bad financial decisions. Maybe you go and whack a whole bunch of money on the stock exchange, on a very nice and bright Monday, and that's followed by a black Tuesday. And suddenly you've got nothing. Now, if you're prepared to lose everything and keep your happiness, that's the important part. It's being able to have the money and being prepared to lose the money without losing your happiness. Now, if you can do that, that's fine. A lot of people can't. A lot of people lose their money on the stock exchange and they jump out the window. And most of them not on a ground floor bungalow, they tend to go a little higher than that. And this is where it becomes problematic, so we have to be very, very careful. As I say, the Buddha never told any of the kings who came to visit him that the way to Dhamma is to get rid of your cash. It was never ever mentioned. So you can have cash and you can have Dhamma, just as long as you know which one is more important. Because when you die, you can't take your cash with you. And people who owe you money tend not to put it in your coffin. So you're not even going to get back the money that you owe to people, that people owe to you. And if you demand that they give you back the money, then if they're anything like me, they'd write a check and tell you to cash it when you got to wherever it was that you were going. So I don't know if there's a sutra that says you can have everything, but I don't think there's any sutras that tell you you can't. But the Buddha was more interested in your spiritual happiness than your worldly happiness. And some of the happiest people I've ever seen are beggars.
Didn't mention back then you see the homeless people, they're not so happy. Okay, I just want to summarize what I say. Just I'm searching for an answer. What I searched, I found that you can learn to have the world currency and the spiritual currency together.
Yeah.
Right? And yet, when you leave, you got only two choices. You create heaven on earth first, and then you have another two choices which you cannot decide. Anyway, nobody decide. Whether when you leave, you go to the heaven of divine. Rather than you couldn't create heaven on earth, right? And then you hope to go to divine. That's what I feel. Perhaps you want to find out in Sutra, there's such teaching that teach that we can have faith, worldly currency and spiritual currency together.
Well, as I say,
That's excellent grade, not just.
Well, that's why I say, I mean, the sutras, you know, the kings certainly had great wealth, they certainly had great happiness, but they must have been, even with all that money, all that wealth, you know, and all these wives and musicians and dancers and everything else. So why did they need a Buddha?
I don't know.
Because they still weren't happy. They still understood that that wasn't true happiness. But as I say, the Buddha never said that they had to get rid of their money to become happy. You know? But he taught them the Dhamma, and so they could have both kinds of happiness. They could have their spiritual happiness, and they could have their material happiness.
That's what I want to see. You can never be to Sutra writing. Since you are a learned person, instead of written insight, that teach that you will have both of everything.
Well, as I say, I mean, you know,
one another.
yeah, as I say, the sutras are quite clear that, you know, the kings had both. So yes,
That's insight.
yeah, it's entirely. Anybody else?
Bhante, there's simile of the beautiful girl in the land, which the Buddha, the Blessed One, has taught. When you do meditation, if you use that simile, does it mean that it is one-pointed mindfulness? But what about sometimes you get stray thoughts? You can observe the stray thoughts, but sometimes it stays stagnant.
Yeah, it does. It can become like that. But what happens, you see, first of all, we get caught up in our thoughts sometimes. You know, we indulge our thoughts. And that's why it doesn't stay permanent, actually, but it seems to stay permanent. It's hard to get rid of it. But that's because we have decided to run with that thought. And then it becomes very difficult, because you usually find what happens is you've not realised that you've got that thought for some time. But for some time you've been indulging, you've been thinking of it, playing with it, messing with it, and then it becomes hard to get rid of. But at that stage, your object of meditation has moved, you know. So you can go to that thought, and then you need to analyse that thought. So now you're shifting. So you were doing, let's say you were just doing the breath meditation, Anapanasati. So you're watching the breath come in, you're watching the breath come out. You know, this is body. You know? So this was the object of meditation. But then it's drifted off, it's gone thinking, it's off into la land, you're thinking about the past or thinking about the future, because this is usually where the mind wanders off to. So once you realise it's there, and if you realise that we're having problems getting rid of it, then stop and go, where did that thought come from? What caused this thought to arise? What sort of feeling am I getting from this thought? So now you've gone back, but instead of body, you're going to mind. So now you've changed the object of meditation. Because if you can't just put it to the side, let it go, then you might as well use it as an object of meditation. So now we can understand clearly thinking. And then it's like a thought has arisen. We don't get into I am thinking, because now we're taking ownership of the thought. So we just see that a thought has arisen. And so that's the first thing you see, okay, a thought has arisen. Now, if you can, you go back to the original object of your meditation. Whatever you've chosen as an object of meditation, try and go back to it. But if that becomes a difficulty, because we've got to be careful because we start to get frustrated. And when we're frustrated, we're angry. And one of the things that we're trying to get rid of in our meditation practices is anger. So we don't need to create any more through our meditation practice. Don't get frustrated. Go to the thing that's stopping you from meditating and use that as the object of your meditation. So you're not flitting backwards and forwards between things, but you're actually going to physically change or mentally change the object of meditation. So now it's like, okay, now I'm meditating on thinking. Where did this thought arise from? How does this thought make me feel? Is it wholesome or unwholesome? If it's unwholesome, should I still be thinking about it? If it's wholesome, then okay, maybe I can spend some more time on it. But how did it arise? How do I feel about it? Now we start to understand how thinking affects us. And when you think, well, okay, I'm thinking about the past and I'm feeling quite happy. So we can understand, because often when we think about the past, we do think happy thoughts. That vacation was really nice when we went to the beach. And we have these happy thoughts. Often when we're thinking about the future, it's with worry. I'm not quite sure, financial situation, will I have a job in 6 months' time? These sorts of things we start to worry. But we can actually start to see that when we think about the past, it's a distortion. The past is gone. And if you go back to that beach, maybe they've cut down half the palm trees that were on the beach. Not there anymore. So your whole idea of that beach is painted. Memory is very, very painted. It was like when I went back to New Zealand after 20 years. I got into the city and I didn't recognise it. Even the main street, the bottom of the main street, was completely different. My memory of the main street, I knew where there was this wind chime statue type, non-existent. Being concreted over. The ferry boat, we used to have these old double-decker wooden ferries that used to go backwards and forwards, were gone. Speed cabs. So, and the ferry building wasn't a ferry building anymore. It was like bistro cafes. You paid an excessive amount of money for a cup of coffee. It was like the tallest freestanding building in the southern hemisphere was sitting there. It wasn't there when I went last time. It was non-existent. And I knew that area well because it was next to the police station, which is well known, that was still there. It's not very similar. But so my memory of my own city was tainted, and when I went back there I didn't recognise my own city. It was completely different. We worry about the future. And so many times we worry about these things and then it just doesn't come to pass. So it's not what we worry about. But we do, so we just start to look at how does this thought make me feel? And so we start to understand how thinking works. And so when we do it that way, the thinking is no longer a hindrance to the meditation practice because that's become the object of the meditation practice. And the body, feelings, mind and numbness. And we just use it as an object of meditation. That becomes that one-centered, one-pointed concentration becomes the thinking. How does this thinking arise? Is it permanent? Will it pass away? Yeah, it will. So that's what we have to do. So that way we don't get frustrated. As I say, it's like, only people, I get so angry when I meditate. You're doing something wrong. We're meant to be getting rid of anger, not developing anger. So we don't get frustrated when we meditate. This has arisen. we deal with it. And as I say, if we want to, we go back to the original, when it becomes difficult, then we stay with whatever it is, and we examine what was the cause of it. We can see that it will pass away. Sometimes it needs to be given some of that. We try to ignore it. Sometimes it keeps knocking on the door. Hello, 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 hello. And you can't sit there and go away. You can't go, hello, hello. So sometimes you've got to pay attention to it. It's like when the Seventh-day Adventists knock on your door. You've got to open the door and say, look, no thank you, I'm busy right now. But my neighbour would be very interested. And you send them off. And it's the same with thoughts, you know. Thoughts come knocking at the door. Sometimes we've got to give them some attention. We've got to acknowledge that they're there. Otherwise they just keep knocking. And you get nowhere. So sometimes we have to give them a little bit of attention, and that's often enough to make them go away. But don't ever get frustrated. Not with you. Anybody else?
We would like to thank Bhante for delivering such an inspiring and interesting talk. Before we share merits with the devas and our departed ones, I have a few announcements